King Harold II. He was never meant to be England's last native king, but fate and ambition made him one. Born around 1022 into one of the most powerful Anglo Saxon families, he rose quickly under King Edward the Confessor, becoming Earl of Wessex and England's most capable soldier. When Edward died childless in January 1066, Harold was crowned almost immediately, claiming the dying king had named him heir. But two rivals wanted that same crown, Harald Hardrada of Norway and William, Duke of Normandy. In September 1066, Hardrada invaded from the north. Harold's army marched nearly 200 miles in 4 days, crushed the Norwegians at Stamford Bridge, and ended Viking invasions forever. Just weeks later, news arrived. William had landed in the south with roughly 7,000 men. Exhausted but determined, Harold turned his troops around and raced back across the country. On October 14, 1066, it came to a single day that would decide England's future, the Battle of Hastings. Harold's men formed the famous shield wall on Senlac Hill and withstood hours of Norman assault. But fatigue and trick tactics broke the line. An arrow, legend says, struck Harold in the eye. Moments later, he fell, and his army collapsed. That defeat ended centuries of Anglo-Saxon rule. William's conquest brought the French language, feudal law, new architecture, and an elite class that transformed England from its roots. Harold II ruled barely 9 months, yet his fall split English history in two. A single battle that turned a proud kingdom into the foundation of medieval Europe's most powerful empire.
Emperor Constantine XI Palaiologos. Born in 1405 into a once glorious dynasty now surrounded by enemies, he became emperor of the Byzantine Empire in 1449, ruling over little more than Constantinople in a few scattered lands. For 1,000 years, the city had stood as the heart of the Eastern Roman world, its walls unbeaten by time or siege. By the mid-1400s, though, the empire was exhausted, its treasury nearly empty, and the rising Ottoman power under Sultan Mehmed II was preparing the final blow. In April 1453, Mehmed surrounded Constantinople with an army of nearly 80,000 men and massive cannons that could hurl 600-pound stones. Constantine had barely 7,000 defenders, Greeks, Italians, and mercenaries, and no reinforcements coming. Still, he refused to flee. Through weeks of bombardment, he encouraged soldiers from the ramparts, swearing to live or die with his people. Before dawn on May 29th, the Ottomans launched their last assault. The walls finally broke. Constantine removed his imperial regalia and rushed into the front lines. His body was never found. By midday, the city had fallen, ending the Byzantine Empire and what many call the last remnant of Rome itself. Constantinople became Istanbul, capital of the Ottomans, and the fall marked the symbolic end of the Middle Ages. Constantine XI's stand became legend, a monarch's courage outlasting his empire.
King Darius III of Persia. He came to the throne around 336 BCE, inheriting the vast Achaemenid Empire that stretched from Greece to India. But it was an empire weakened by corruption, rebellion, and divided provinces. That same year, far to the west, a young Macedonian king named Alexander began his march of conquest. Their first clash came at the Battle of Issus in 333 BCE. Darius commanded perhaps 100,000 men, Alexander fewer than 40,000. Yet the Persian lines broke under the Macedonian charge. Darius fled the field, leaving behind his family and royal treasures, a humiliation that shook his rule. Determined to redeem himself, Darius raised another massive army and faced Alexander again at Gaugamela in 331 BCE. Despite superior numbers and war chariots, Persia once more lost to Alexander's precise tactics and relentless cavalry. As Babylon, Susa, and Persepolis fell, Darius fled east, hoping to gather allies. But his own satrap, Bessus, betrayed and murdered him. When Alexander found Darius's body, he ordered it buried with royal honors and declared himself the rightful king of Asia. That defeat ended 2 centuries of Persian dominance and began one of the greatest cultural shifts in history, the spread of Greek language and ideas across the ancient world. Darius III's fall showed how empire, no matter how vast, can collapse in the face of a single mind uniting vision with action. King Richard III. Born in 1452, a Plantagenet prince raised in the storm of the Wars of the Roses, a decades-long struggle between the houses of York and Lancaster for England's throne. When his brother, King Edward IV, died suddenly in 1483, Richard seized power from his 12-year-old nephew, claiming to defend the realm but likely securing it for himself. The boy and his brother vanished in the Tower of London, and suspicion hung over Richard's crown from the start. For 2 uneasy years, he ruled with efficiency, yet deep mistrust. Then came Henry Tudor, a Lancastrian exile gathering support in France. In August 1485, their armies met at Bosworth Field, about 10,000 men in total. Richard's forces outnumbered Henry's, but key nobles still wavered. Refusing to flee, Richard charged straight toward Henry, cutting down his standard-bearer before being surrounded. There, amid the crush of battle, he was slain, fighting on foot. His death ended the Plantagenet dynasty and began the Tudor era under Henry VII. For centuries, Richard's body disappeared, until 2012, when it was found under a parking lot in Leicester. His story remains one of ambition, loyalty, and downfall. The final king of England to fall by the sword, his death closing the medieval age in a single violent instant.
Emperor Montezuma II, born around 1466, Montezuma II ruled the Aztec Empire at its glorious height, commanding millions across central Mexico. Known for intelligence, ceremony, and absolute authority, he presided over Tenochtitlan, a floating jewel of canals and temples. But when Spanish ships arrived in 1519, carrying Hernán Cortés and fewer than 600 soldiers, Montezuma's world began to unravel. Believing at first these strangers might be divine messengers, he welcomed them into the city. That courtesy proved fatal. Within months, the Spaniards took him hostage inside his own palace, using him to control the empire through fear. When violence finally erupted between Aztec warriors and Spanish forces, Montezuma tried to plead for peace. Stones and spears flew, some from his own people, and he was killed in the chaos. The Spaniards fled but returned with allies, disease, and artillery. By 1521, Tenochtitlan lay in ruins. The Aztec Empire was gone, replaced by Spanish rule. Montezuma's death marked not just the fall of a monarch, but the collapse of an entire civilization, one of the swiftest and most tragic conquests in history.
Mary, Queen of Scots. Mary Stuart became Queen of Scotland at just 6 days old in 1542. Educated in France, she grew into a charismatic and politically sharp monarch, married to the French Dauphin, and for a brief moment, Queen of both France and Scotland. But when her husband died young, she returned home to govern a fiercely divided land. Her rule soon spiraled into scandal, a disastrous marriage to Lord Darnley, his suspicious murder, and her reckless union with the man accused of killing him. In 1567, Scottish nobles rebelled. She was forced to abdicate in favor of her infant son, James VI, and fled to England seeking refuge from her cousin, Queen Elizabeth I. Instead, she became a prisoner for nearly 19 years. Accused of plotting to overthrow Elizabeth, Mary was tried for treason and executed in 1587. Though her life ended under the headsman's axe, her bloodline triumphed in the long run. Her son James inherited the English throne after Elizabeth's death, uniting the crowns of Scotland and England. Mary's story remains a haunting portrait of a queen undone not by weakness, but by the dangerous game of royal politics, where family, faith, and ambition collide.
King Charles I of England became king in 1625, inheriting not just a throne, but a storm of religious tension and distrust between monarch and parliament.
Believing deeply in the divine right of kings, he ruled as if accountable only to God. His insistence on absolute authority, raising taxes without approval, and imposing religious reforms ignited open rebellion. By 1642, England was at civil war, royalists loyal to the king versus Parliament's forces led by Oliver Cromwell. For years, both sides traded victories, but Parliament's new model army, disciplined and inspired, eventually overwhelmed the royal cause. In 1649, Charles faced a public trial for treason, an unthinkable act against a reigning monarch. Calm and composed, he declared his innocence and dignity, then lay his head on the block outside London's banqueting house. One strike of the axe ended both his life and the divine monarchy he championed. His death shocked Europe. England became a republic for 11 years, and when the monarchy was restored, no king would ever again claim absolute power. Charles I's fall defined the constitutional balance between ruler and people that still shapes Britain's democracy today.
King Louis XVI of France. Born in 1754, Louis XVI ascended to France's throne at just 20 years old. Earnest, intelligent, yet indecisive, he inherited a country crippled by debt and inequality. His marriage to Marie Antoinette was meant to strengthen alliances, but their lavish lifestyle became the symbol of royal excess as common people faced hunger. When the French Revolution erupted in 1789, Louis hesitated, sometimes promising reform, sometimes resisting change. In 1791, he tried to flee the country in disguise. Captured and returned to Paris, his credibility was destroyed. The monarchy collapsed, and in 1793, he was tried by the new republic for treason. On a cold January morning, Louis rode calmly to the guillotine, telling the crowd he prayed his blood would bring peace to France. His death ended more than 1,000 years of French kingship. The revolution that killed him would topple monarchies across Europe and spark new ideas about liberty, equality, and power. Louis's failure to adapt to history's tide became one of its defining lessons. Indecision can undo empires.
Napoleon Bonaparte, born in 1769 on Corsica, rose through the chaos of the French Revolution and became general by his mid-20s. Through audacity and sheer genius, he conquered most of Europe, crowned himself Emperor of the French in 1804, and built an empire stretching from Spain to Poland. At his peak, he commanded over 1 million men, reshaping nations and laws under the Napoleonic Code. But ambition knows no pause. In 1812, Napoleon invaded Russia with about 600,000 troops. Fewer than 100,000 returned. Defeated alliances closed in, forcing his abdication in 1814. Exiled to Elba, he escaped within a year, returning to France and reclaiming power for one desperate 100 days. On June 18, 1815, he met the Duke of Wellington at Waterloo, and there his empire ended. Crushed once more, he was exiled to remote St. Helena, where he died in 1821 at 51. Napoleon lost his empire, yet his ideas of merit, state reform, and national identity reshaped Europe forever. His defeat proved that even the greatest strategist cannot command history itself.
Emperor Maximilian I of Mexico. Born in 1832 to Austria's royal Habsburg line, Maximilian was cultured, idealistic, and steeped in the romance of empire. When France's Napoleon III sought to install a friendly ruler in Mexico, Maximilian accepted the crown in 1864, against warnings that most Mexicans opposed the foreign-backed regime. He arrived in Mexico City with his wife, Empress Carlotta, determined to modernize education and legal rights, yet his rule rested on French guns. When the French withdrew to fight elsewhere in 1866, Republican forces led by Benito Juárez rose rapidly.
By spring 1867, Maximilian's small army collapsed. Offered a chance to flee, he refused to abandon supporters and was captured after the siege of Querétaro. On June 19, he faced a firing squad, reportedly giving each soldier gold coins, saying, "Aim at my heart." His death turned him into a tragic symbol, a well-meaning ruler destroyed by politics he never fully grasped. The Empire of Mexico lasted just 3 years, but remains a vivid reminder that idealism means little without legitimacy. Emperor Nicholas II of Russia inherited the Russian throne in 1894, the richest land empire on earth, but already cracking under inequality and unrest. Personally gentle and devoted to family, he lacked the political instinct to govern an age of change. Industrial strikes, peasant poverty, and defeat in the Russo-Japanese War in 1905 shook his authority. Then came World War I, millions dead, food shortages, and soldiers refusing orders. In February 1917, even loyal generals urged him to abdicate. Nicholas signed away the crown, ending 3 centuries of Romanov rule. He and his family were held under house arrest until Bolshevik revolutionaries executed them in July 1918. His fall transformed global politics. The Russian monarchy disappeared, and the world's first communist state emerged. The man, once called Little Father, became a cautionary figure, a ruler undone not by malice, but by the fatal gap between tradition and a nation demanding change. Kaiser Wilhelm II of Germany. He was the grandson of Britain's Queen Victoria and Emperor of Germany from 1888, dreamed of matching Britain's naval power and leading Europe through force of will. Confident, outspoken, and often reckless, he expanded Germany's military and pushed policies that rival powers viewed as threats. By 1914, his alliances and ambitions helped set the stage for World War I. Germany fought heroically, but faced encirclement, blockade, and the loss of millions. By late 1918, revolt spread through the army and cities alike. The Kaiser's generals urged abdication. He fled to exile in the Netherlands, where he spent the rest of his life chopping wood and writing memoirs. The empire he left behind dissolved into revolution and the fragile Weimar Republic. Wilhelm died in 1941, watching Europe burn once again. His defeat marked not just the end of Germany's monarchy, but the death of the old imperial world. One man's vanished throne symbolizing the collapse of an entire age of empires. Haile Selassie I of Ethiopia. Born in 1892 as Tafari Makonnen, he rose from provincial nobility to Ethiopia's crown in 1930, taking the regal name Haile Selassie, Power of the Trinity. To many, he embodied modern African sovereignty. He reformed laws, promoted education, and joined the League of Nations, making Ethiopia a rare, independent nation amid colonial rule. That independence was shattered in 1935 when Mussolini's Italy invaded with hundreds of thousands of troops and poison gas. Selassie fled into exile, traveling to Geneva to plead for help, warning that fascist aggression would soon engulf the world. No one acted. In 1941, with Allied support, he returned at the head of Ethiopian rebels, reclaiming his capital and renewing his kingdom. 3 decades later, famine, social unrest, and charges of autocracy eroded his authority. In 1974, soldiers deposed the aging emperor. He died the next year under mysterious circumstances while under arrest. Yet even in defeat, his image endured as a symbol of African unity and resistance, and as a spiritual figure to millions in the Rastafarian movement. His reign showed how one man could embody both tradition's glory and its limits in a changing century. King Farouk I of Egypt. Born in 1920, inheriting Egypt's throne at 16. At first, his youth and charm inspired hope, a handsome monarch promising renewal after British domination. But corruption, extravagance, and detachment quickly eroded support.
As ordinary Egyptians struggled, stories spread of the king's vast car collection, lavish banquets, and treasure-laden yachts. By the early 1950s, economic hardship and the humiliating defeat against Israel in 1948 turned the nation against him. On July 23, 1952, the Free Officers led by Gamal Abdel Yasser and Mohammed Naguib launched a nearly bloodless coup. Confronted by tanks, Farouk boarded his yacht, saluted the new republic, and sailed into exile. He spent his remaining years drifting through Europe's casinos and hotels before dying in 1965. His downfall ended more than 2,000 years of monarchy in Egypt and opened the Arab world's modern nationalist era. His defeat wasn't on the battlefield, but in the hearts of his people, a royal life undone by disconnection from reality.
Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi of Iran. Born in 1919, Mohammad Reza took Iran's throne in 1941 after British and Soviet forces forced his father to abdicate. Charismatic and Western-leaning, he envisioned a modern, industrial, secular Iran. His White Revolution in the 1960s built roads, schools, and land reforms, but it also widened inequality, alienated clerics, and crushed political dissent under his secret police, Savak. For years, he seemed unshakable, backed by the United States and oil wealth, but by 1978, protests surged nationwide, uniting religious groups, students, and workers against him. Despite his modernity campaign, he saw him as a puppet of foreign powers. In January 1979, gravely ill and powerless, the Shah fled the country. Within weeks, Ayatollah Khomeini returned from exile and the monarchy vanished. The Shah died of cancer in exile the next year, leaving behind a nation transformed forever. His grand vision of progress through force collapsed into revolution, reminding the world that modernization without legitimacy is the quickest path to downfall.